Hey guys, today we're going to be starting a new sculpture using water-based clay. It's a female nude sculpture, and this is what I usually tend to do. I cut like a slab of clay directly from a bag, put it down as my base. What I'm doing is drawing in where I think the knees are going to be. This is a kneeling pose. So I just kind of rough it in. I just want to see where the weight is. She has a little bit more weight on her left than on the right. I noticed that right away. And what I do is I cut the shapes of the majority of the body directly from the bag of clay, and I kind of stick it in there. I find that this really gets me going a lot faster than just building it up slowly. So at this point, you can kind of see that is the legs both on the ground. And I build it from the ground up, so I'm kind of pushing the clay up. And this is a 2-session pose so far, but I'm adding clay slowly because I don't want any air bubbles to build up. So I'm just adding the clay. This is the tool I like to scrape things off, just to remove a little bit of the anatomy. And this is very much what I add clay. I add it like slowly at a time. I don't want to build the bulk right away because it's too much weight. This sculpture already has taken up one entire bag of clay. That's 25 pounds. But some people have asked me, why do I make holes in the clay midway? And that's because you have to hollow out water-based clay in order to fire a sculpture in a kiln, because otherwise it's too solid and it could break or blow up in the kiln. So the best way to do it, in my opinion, is just to kind of build it midway and then hollow it out midway, and then remove the inner parts, connect it to the base. That way you have the ability of firing it. So this sculpture, she is leaning quite a bit to her left, so it's a delicate process. And remember, the clay is going to be sinking in to the base, so you have to constantly be pushing it up. I like to use a paint scraper to really push in the clay, make sure there's no air bubbles and everything gets connected extremely well in there. But I build it very slowly, and I do like to keep things nice and flat in the beginning. So there you go with a very flat tool, flat wooden tool. I think if you're starting out, try to do a sculpture just using this sort of tool. It's a flat tool that makes your sculptures a little bit more geometric. And I think one of the things that I find a lot of beginning sculptors do is that they try to smooth out things way too much, and you're better off just using a very large flat tool to sculpt. I think your sculptures would end up being a lot more interesting. At least that's what I found in my sculptures, but I tend to smooth things out towards the end. So you can start to see some of the anatomy. I draw in where I think the folds of the fat are going to be. This model is extremely heavy, and I think that's the interesting thing about sculpting this model. I find that you can see a lot of the anatomy, especially up top, because the fat is getting pushed down. You see the scapula, you see a lot of the erector spinae muscles kind of evident. If you are looking for it, then you know that they're there. But unfortunately, it's easy to kind of look at a human body that's this size and kind of just see lumps of fat. But there's a lot of very interesting muscles underneath that are affecting the surface. And that is the right arm. Her right arm is going underneath her left breast, which is a very interesting pose. And I think that's why I picked this sort of pose. I don't have a theme for the sculpture just yet, but eventually I plan on doing something. I just don't know what. I'm more interested in the sculpting of the human body for this one, because it's very unique to have a model this heavy. Normally I avoid doing models that are heavy because they use up more clay, and I'm very cheap when buying clay. The good thing about water-based clay, guys, is that it's very inexpensive compared to oil-based clay. But of course, you have to fire it in a kiln, and depending on your location, you might not have somebody or a business that will fire a sculpture. I have my own kiln, so that's taken care of, but you could always find somebody that's got a kiln that does pottery and is willing to fire it for you. I think it's important not to get carried away with the details. One of the things I find is that when a lot of artists sculpt, they'll take some time and just concentrate too much on the head, and then when they realize that the proportion is off, they refuse to move the head, so you have this really beautiful head and a body that doesn't seem to be long. But I made this mistake many times over, and that's why I caution against spending so much time on any particular section. If you watch this video, I jump from one area to the other. So I jump from one body part to the other, and I try to keep the entire piece in mind, constantly like stepping out to make sure that I'm seeing the entire thing, and then I'll work on the arm, and then I'll work in the back. This video and most of the videos that I've done are chronological, so as I am editing these videos, I am showing exactly what I tend to do. So going to the head, from the back, to the legs, that's usually something that I do a lot. So towards the end though, I will concentrate much more on some particular parts of the anatomy. Once the clay firms up, you can add more detail in the legs and the thighs, because the clay tends to like push itself down quite a bit, and if you are hasty and you start getting details in the legs, you're going to find that everything is going to get smushed. This clay does help with firming up quite a bit because it is grog clay. If you look carefully, you'll see these little white specks. You can see it on the clay. That is grog. And grog is fired bits of silica that are in the clay that help the firing process. So it gives it a lot more strength to the clay. In the past, I really like how non-grog feels, but non-grog clay tends to crack and blow up in the kilns much more than this with clay with grog. I do enjoy sculpting the various folds of fat that she has, but one thing I'm finding is that she's got so much more fat than I'm used to that often I look at her and I think, we need more fat. And another thing is that I don't know exactly what type of face I'm going to be doing. I can make it a pretty face, I can make it a very unattractive face, I can make it into a monster. I'm not really sure, but I was looking at some Rococo sculptures, and Rococo sculpture and Rococo art has a lot of plus size women in their subject, so that might be an interesting thing to do. So this tool that I'm using is a scraper, and The reason I scrape things, even though I finish them to a certain point, is that when you scrape the anatomy forms together, it's a way of blending it together, and it creates a unified clay body, if that makes sense. So now I'm going in for some more of the details. So I progressively start adding more and more detail. And you know, like with my sculptures, there's some things that I've done that I don't put too much details, and then some I go out and do more, but I haven't found really a happy medium. The last sculpture that I did do was a skull, and after a certain point, I'm like, I don't need any more detail. The Beavis and Butthead sculptures that I've done, I tend to put a whole lot more detail. You'd be surprised how difficult those things are to do. But this is just session 1 of the sculpture. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, post up in the comments below. Just make sure you hit that like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. I really appreciate you guys watching. Thank you.